Hey folks, John here. So today we're going to do a walk around with the bulk now that I've got it sort of set up and just finished a nice ride with it now and top ended at about 60 kilometers an hour. I love that bike. Anyway, we'll go out and have a look around. Hey folks, so what we're going to do is the walk around here from the for the bulk. Um, so you can see it's a beautiful machine. Well, I got bright colors, so green and yellow. People either love it or hate it, but for me, it is visible. I also added the reflective stripe down the side because I live here in a rural area and a bit of a challenge to be seen at night. So we want anything that can help you out. And the fact that these are reflective, the bulk design stickers are also reflective, but I find they just don't give enough reflection for what we have around here, right? Right now I have the summer hood fitted on it. There is a race hood that goes with it. I had it on last week, took it off because I was riding it in the rain and it is hot. It really is. So and today's actually, by Canadian standards, it's a hot day. It's 26 degrees here. So, you know, I have it. Now, I'm just going to get my light here because it's dark enough in here that you can't really see inside the bike. So, inside here, you can see it's really well finished. So the tiller, not particularly stiff or anything like that. It has this nice cable, so you can set it to where you want. Because I'm not used to tiller steering, never had it before, right? So the Katanga is tank steering. All my trikes are tank steering, all that type of stuff. So it took a little bit of getting used to. I also have a 10 amp hour battery in here. I have the lupine light as well as the hotspot. And with the lupine battery, it's 14.4 volt. The lupine light is a 30 watt light. So on high beam, it'll only last for about 2.5 hours. And with this, the 10 amp hour battery, I get about 8.5 hours. I did a rundown test on it from full charge with all the lights on combined. So that's the hot spot, the running lights, and the hot spot on steady, running lights, and high beams on the lupine. I got about 8.5 hours out of it. So that's pretty acceptable. You can see the fit and finish in it is really quite good. Now this bike is small, right? It's a very compact bike. It's a compact design. In my particular case, I'm 186 centimeters and around 96 kilos. So I'm not a small lad. And as you can see, even though the manhole is actually quite large, it narrows significantly right near the end. And that's problematic for anyone who is a good size, because what happens is your shoulders end up hitting the side of the lip here on the manhole cover. So initially I had the, I set up the bottom bracket the way I want it, and then frigged around with the seat to try and get it exactly where I want it. And I never could get it quite right. And so what I found is that what you really need to do when you're going to set these things up is set up the seat first, right? So I'll show you what I mean. So initially, the seat doesn't need any tools. You can basically pull it out of the bike and adjust it without any tools. It's pretty easy to do. When you take it out, like right now I've got it set up, so it has all the pads that I want. It comes with a whole hockey sock full of these pads, right? So there is one extra pad, but it also comes with the support bracket, which initially I didn't even know this thing came off, but it fits on with Velcro. So, and as you can see when it's on, there's a significant amount of elevation. What I found is even without the seat pads, this is too high for me, right? My shoulders still hit the edge of the manhole. So when I was actually looking at the drivetrains, I was trying to figure out, and then, wow, this thing does come off. And then of course the pattern here is exactly the same as seat pads. So I went, okie dokie. Put the seat pads on, and then guess what? Now it's the right height. So what I suggest you do is start with all the pads on, set the seat in and see if it's the right height for you. And then basically drop it down and set it forward and whatnot till you're comfortable, right? You don't want to go crazy on these things, because what happens is if you remove the more pads you remove, of course, the more laid back the seat is. So your head is actually on this thing, so you're basically getting a good crick in your neck, right? And if you're an old goat like me, that's not a comfortable way to be. So I want it as high as possible without banging off the manhole cover. So that happens to be the thing for me. Getting the seat in, fairly straightforward. It's just you know, you shove her in. I know that it's supposed to be in the second hole here and second hole there, and then snap her down, and that's it. So as you can see, nicely laid back, works really well, right? So you get that first, and then what you want to do, is to adjust the bottom bracket accordingly. So how we do that, again, we'll take off the maintenance hatch here on the front. So in here, this is the bottom bracket sled. So we've got 2 bolts on the top, there's 2 underneath that, and they take a 5mm Allen key. And you probably need to have like a socket set or something like that, because there's just not a lot of room in here to well, you could get, I guess you can get the regular Allen key in here, but down the bottom you can't. It's actually recessed underneath, so it's very, very difficult to see it and get an Allen key in. So what I use is a 1/4-inch drive socket set with metric Allen keys, right? So for all of this, you can get them into the hard to get places, and there's a lot of hard to get places at these things. It's not designed for maintenance, right? So as you can see, I've got a 40-foot tooth chain ring, 62 tooth chain ring. So how we adjusted these things, you don't adjust them the same way you would a bike, right? What I did was I pulled off the bolts, loosened them off, moved the sled back to where I know it's too short. And then when you get in, when you're adjusting a bike, normally what you do is you go to the maximum extent of the pedals with your heel on the pedal, and when your knee locks, that's it. That's where your seat goes. And then you do it with the other leg, because rarely is it that your legs are the same length. And you do that for the longest leg, right, on a bike. On a velomobile, not so much. So on the velomobile, you actually do that initially. So what I do is I put it too short, go the maximum extent of the pedals on one leg with my heel on the pedal, push it when my knee locks, and then do the same thing on with my other leg, right? And if it moves any farther, what we do is we move it back about 1 millimeter, right? Because in a bike you want to do it with the longest leg, on a velomobile you want to do it with the shortest leg, right? And the reason being is because you're going to damage your knees otherwise. It's a major complaint that people have with these things. So you're very sensitive to length. So what I figured is that, you know, if you do that and you got you finally got the sled where you want it, with your heel, then what you want to do is pull it back about 4 millimeters, and it'll be very close, and then go for a ride. If you get knee pain, you need to extend it a little, it's still too long, sorry, so you got to bring it back another millimeter or 2. If you get hip pain, it's too short, so give it another millimeter out. But 4 millimeters is pretty close, right? So you measure it like you would a bike, except that you use your short leg, not your long leg, right, as being the maximum extent, and then pull it back about 4 millimeters, and that should actually give you a good fit. So that's what it's like up front. So this is actually very, very easy to adjust, right? However, there is an idler up the front, which I have bypassed at the moment. I'm actually going to use it again when I do my mod, right? And the reason being is because that idler, basically it pulls the chain very much forward. So on the small ring, there's not enough engagement, so it tends to drop chain on the small ring. However, I'm doing a mod which is going to go to a single chain ring. So what I'm going to do is bring that idler way forward, right, and start using it again, because then I can move the bottom bracket as I need to without having to adjust the chain. So once I get the chain adjusted. So what I'm going to be doing is going to an FNEO drive, which is a planetary gear system in the front. And so I'm going to put the 44 tooth chain ring on, because the small ring is actually the low gear on the FNEO. And then the middle gear will give you a 1.4 times advantage, and the big gear gives you 1.79. So with a 44 tooth chain ring, it means you get about 62 equivalent in the mid gear and around 78 in the large gear. So I'm going to do that when I'm just waiting for parts to get that done. The other thing I would recommend is, if you look at the configurator for the bulk, the default for the crank length is 140 millimeters. There's a good reason for that. This thing is quite compact, so I wear a size 44 shoe. And with a 44 shoe and a 155 millimeter crank, I have, once in a while I will get body strike on the toe, and once in a while I get heel strike on the bottom. I only have one shoes that will fit this. My other pair of shoes will not work on this bike. And my Look Keo also don't work on this bike. So my Look Keo power pedals are actually in the walk because there's a lot more space there. So if you wear more than a 44, I recommend that you stick with the 140 millimeter cranks, right? You're going to be a lot happier. If I had to do it over again, even with a 44 shoe, I would go to a 150 millimeter crank, right? I wouldn't do the 155. You know, it sounds counterintuitive, but because this bike is so stiff, it doesn't really matter, right? And so we'll talk about that in a minute. Because even with the gearing here, this has an 1140 in the rear, and with the 44 tooth, I didn't think it was going to be enough gear, enough low gear for the type of terrain we have here. Like we live in a very old area of Canada. Some of the roads here have no grade control, so there are 16-17% grades in some of the places around this area. So you need a lot of gear. And I was kind of concerned with having a 44 to a 40 as the lowest gear. But it turns out because this bike is so stiff and so efficient, it's not as bad as you would think. I can climb a 10 or 12% grade with it at around 11-12 kilometers an hour, which is not bad at all, you know, for someone my age and my weight. So, you know, a 15 or 17% grade is going to be a hell of a lot of work, but I can get up it, you know, so it's pretty good. So next we'll go and have a look here at the back, and I'll show you the rear mech. So here in the rear, we've got the hatch cover here for the derailleur system. It's an XT Dior long cage, and so this one's set up pretty good right now. When they come from the factory, you need to check and make sure the B setting is set right. In my particular case, it wasn't, and the high limit was also not set right, so it was not getting to high gear. So playing with the limit screws here is a pain in the butt. That's a limit screw, that's the B limit screw over here, and there's where's the high limit screw? There's the high limit screw over here. So you're going up, so rather than them being in a line like they are in some of the older style derailleurs, these things are not. They're also an Allen key, so they use a 2mm Allen, and it takes some friggin' around because you can't easily see underneath here. So like if you're setting the B setting, what you're supposed to be doing here is looking at from the large cog like this to the guide wheel. It should be 1.5 links basically if the B setting is set ideal. What I ended up doing was getting a little mirror so that I could do that and get the setting right. So this is set to 1.5 links. It's set nearly perfectly, so it's pretty good. Now what it isn't is set up with the right tension. The chain actually still has about 2 or 3 links too long. So because of that, the lowest gears, so the 3 smallest cogs on that cassette will not work with the 44 tooth. Right? It drags the chain on the bodywork. Not a big deal, because most of the time what I found is because this thing is so efficient, I have been running almost exclusively in the large gear, except to climb the more steep hills, in which case then I'm already on the smallest cogs, either the largest cog, either the largest or the second largest. So which are the lowest gears, right? So they'll shift on and work just fine. So it's no problem. Just don't try to go to the small ring when you're in high gear or somewhere close to that, because it just will not work, right? All you're going to hear is a lot of chain rubbing on the bodywork. And so you got to be careful. The capacity of these derailleurs is 47 teeth. So that's a combination of the front end difference and the rear end difference. And so when you're configuring these things, just remember that, because Jan will argue with you that you shouldn't do this, but he'll install it anyway. He's told me that. He says it just won't work right. But if you want to try it, it's up to you. So you need to know that what he's telling you is the right thing. Right? It just won't.